So I want to acknowledge right away that the passage that we read probably hit some buttons. Am I right? Like, oh, what are you talking about, Paul? What are you doing there? Right? There's a lot of like loaded kind of inflammatory language, right, around, we don't love the word condemnation. We don't love, like the idea that doing something wrong would make us sick. Like there's a lot in there that's like, well, that's not how I understand my God, right? And then there's sort of the question of like, what on earth, what like neuron fired to make Pastor Mallory think that this has anything to do with kindness? Right? Do I look a little wild up here being like, no, this is actually the passage, right? And who's doubting my exegetical skills? Okay, all right, vote of confidence, appreciate it, thank you. Okay, so there are several people in this room that I am aware of that have a background with this particular passage and how it was used to scare the pants off of us when it came to taking communion. So I grew up at Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I had to take 2 full school years in 7th and 8th grade of classes at least once a week to be deemed worthy of taking communion. So they took that idea of worthiness really, really seriously. The way that worship was always set up was you had to do confession and absolution prior to taking communion so that you had done that self-reflective practice. And then hopefully in the 15 minutes that the pastor is preaching between confession and absolution and communion, you haven't done anything bad. You're in church, you're in the room, you probably haven't done anything bad, so you're probably worthy to take communion. Literally how I was raised. Right, so it's like this huge fear, right? That oh no, if I take communion unworthily, and then you're you're hearing this from I heard this from the time that I was really little, that oh my gosh, is this gonna have a physical impact on my body if I do this wrong? Super high stakes, turns out, in faith community about how there's this sacrament is holy, and it is the thing that we treasure above all else, and you have to make sure that you are as clean as possible if you are going to participate in this holy ritual that we share. That got taken way out of context, as many things often do. So we have this, I had us read the whole passage, and I didn't editorialize and take out the parts that were uncomfortable, because sometimes I will do that and be like, Paul, okay, you're on one. Let's focus on what we actually need to focus on. But if you think that the letter to the Corinthians, this is a letter to a church in Corinth. So someone, I think of Paul as both the first theologian and the first church consultant. So someone said, hey, we're having a problem here with how you got things set up and the system was going okay, and now it's kind of deteriorated, so now what do we do? Right? So the first part of the letter, Paul is saying all sorts of good things, right? Which we kind of we catch the inverse of when he says, and in this I do not commend you. So he's given them they're at a church, right? You're doing a good job, earlier in the letter, and then he gets to this point and he's like, in this part, not so much. No, you're doing bad, actually. And I don't think Paul has ever been accused of being a nice guy. He was not easy to get along with. He had very firm opinions about how things should be done, and he was willing to go to the mat for them. And the way that he writes his letters, so you think he's a lawyer, right? So he's writing in these very black and white, no uncertain terms kinds of language, and he kind of comes across as kind of a jerk. A lot. right? He rubs us the wrong way, right? Like, I feel like if I was in a room with him, I'd been like, okay, like, technically I think I maybe agree with you, but do you have to be such, why are you like that? Right, we know those people, right, who, like, you know their heart's in the right place, but their communication skills are maybe lacking, right? There aren't the niceties around it, right? And a few months ago, we did our Mama's Mama conversation where we named where our people are from a couple of generations back. And we found out in the course of that there's a lot of Midwesterners in this space, which is great. But we know the phrase Midwestern nice, right? Or, yes? Yeah. Okay. And there's a Southern version of it, isn't there? Bless your heart. Right, exactly. Where you say the thing that, you know, when we were talking a couple of weeks ago about peacemaking, you say the thing that is technically socially appropriate, but inside you're either seething or the nice thing that technically you're saying has just like razors embedded in it, right? There is this devastating way that a Southern lady can say, oh, bless your heart, that you know who was like the most cutting like diss you've ever gotten in your whole life, right? Bless your heart, your hair will grow out, which is Southern code for you got a really bad haircut. Right, you know, and so we say the like nice thing, right, which is bound up with this idea of peacemaking or peacekeeping, right, that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where you say the thing and you're not saying what's actually true, or you say the thing in a way that's technically nice, but is actually so mean. Right, we know people like that, right? So then you have a person, a character like Paul, who's like, you know what, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. And it is not nice. I imagine the church in Corinth, you know, when he's saying these things about like, there's divisions and some of you aren't really about it. And this is how some of these things are going to fall out and you're doing a bad job. Like, that hurts. Sometimes, right? It's super uncomfortable to be told about yourself. And yet, it's the kind thing. To tell the truth. Brené Brown says that clear is kind and unclear is unkind. Right? That when we try to pretty up or beat around the bush or tell it slant a little bit to soften the blow, but maybe they'll actually get what it is we're trying to say to them, like that is actually not kindness. It might be nice, it might be nicer, but it's not kind. And that's one of the things we react to really strongly in Paul's writings. He is not a nice man. But his heart is for the people who have been forgotten, which is extremely clear in this section of Scripture specifically. So one of the things that I want to also talk about the Greek with Paul is anytime that there is a one word with an exclamation point, like when he's like, what? That's actually usually some level of an expletive in the Greek. His favorite one is also by no means, which really genuinely translate to like, F no. Right? So he is fired up, which we don't like get super closely in the English translation, but like this man is mad. But he's mad on behalf of the people who have been downtrodden, right? The whole goal, especially of the early church, was to dismantle systems of inequality, to hold a space where everyone was actually genuinely treated like equals, where everyone's story and everyone's life mattered, where we could practice the world as we knew that it could be. But what was happening in Corinth, which we get a little bit of a taste of, was essentially, there were enslaved people who were part of the fellowship, part of the church in Corinth. But what was happening was the people with means, they were gathering before the enslaved people could attend. And they were, we call our monthly community meal the agape meal. So communion, as we understand it now, was not how they would have practiced it at the time. It was basically a potluck meal, or a meal where also in the early church, it was house churches, so you had a lot of people cooking for other people, right? So the gathering time that was set was before people who were day laborers or who were indentured servants or slaves could not get there in time, and then the people who had more freedom and flexibility in their work schedule or who were independently wealthy were eating all of the food and not leaving anything for the people who had yet to attend. So this is what Paul is fired up about. This is how you eat the meal unworthily. It's basically like, hey, look, we are trying to practice a world where everyone has what they need, where everyone is fed, and you people who have access to your own means, who actually aren't hungry, not in the way that these people are hungry, you're coming in and you're eating all the best stuff, and instead of everyone having a little bit or having what they need, you're overeating and you're getting drunk. Like, what are you doing? That's not what we're supposed to be doing here. So he's mad, right? Because he's mad because technically it's like, so say you RSVP to a party, right? And the party starts at 4 p.m. And that's when the host sets the party. And then the nice thing to do is show up on time, right? We have that cultural, this is what you do, right? You show up on time. So then someone who worked a shift job and doesn't get off until 5, right? They show up at 5:30 with their presence, with their gift, with wanting to participate. But the nice people who all gathered at 4, they're judging that person for being late. Maybe or maybe not knowing the parameters of this person's life, the reason that they might have showed up late. That's nice, right? Showing up on time. There's a culture of niceness around that. But the kind structural thing to do would be to know, oh, I have this friend that I want to be able to fully participate in the life of this celebration. Why wouldn't I change the time so that they could be part of it? We move the party time to 6 rather than 4 so that they have a chance to breathe before they dash off to the next thing and they can be fully present here with us. So I imagine the church in Corinth is like, well, we showed up on time, right? We did what we were supposed to do. We're nice people. We can operate within these structures that have been put in place, and it's not our fault that someone else can't. Never asking the question, how can we be more kind to everyone in our community? It disrupts that momentary niceness in favor of systemic kindness. And that's what Paul is really ticked off about. And there's stuff in there, right? Like that idea of being ill. If you approach a sacrament unworthily, so that comes from it shows up in the Hebrew Bible that if you engage with what is holy in an unclean manner, then there is a physical ramification on your body, right? So that comes out of the Hebrew Bible and Jewish practice at that time. Right, so Paul is operating with kind of his foot in both worlds. Paul is very Jewish in a lot of ways. And so that's theology that we may or may not subscribe to at this point, but what he's saying is like, look, the choices that you are making make you less well, which I think there's a point to that. That our gathering is less complete, less whole, if it does not include, if we have not made the structural changes to include everyone at the table. We are unwell, in this point. Getting drunk or overeating is his definition of unwell. Like, we do not feel good in our bodies when we are not sharing, when we are not a complete gathering, when not everyone has a seat at the table. It's a kindness to look at who's missing and say, how do we make it so that they can be here? Kindness is not the same as being nice, and just like peacemaking is different than peacekeeping, being truly 100% kind can be disruptive. It makes you ask questions about how the system is set up. It makes you ask questions about how we can be more good to one another, where people have fallen through the cracks, where people have not had what they need. It is a transformative question. How can I be kind to you? And there are people like Paul who tell the truth. And sometimes it's a little sandpapery around the edges, and that's okay. But we try to put them in a box by making them be but be nice, right? You're not being nice enough as you're telling me this truth, right? You need to change the language you're using to talk about this issue, or you're too angry. Like, Paul is pissed in this, right? But he's fundamentally looking out for other people, right? He's not mad on his own behalf. He's mad on behalf of the other, and he wants the system to be more kind. He's not being nice. And there are lots of times when we call it tone policing, right? Someone says something that is true and kind, but because it's not as nice as someone would want it, because the pill doesn't go down as easily as the person would want it to, even if it is true and good medicine, it gets thrown out. Oh, you're too angry, you're too much, you're too invested, you're too passionate about this, you're too prophetic, you're too whatever. You're not being nice. You're not playing by the rules. You're not fitting into this box that we have created to ensure that there's only so much conversation we're actually able to have within the parameters set. Right? A prophet's job is to be an octave too high, according to Aram Joshua Heschel, a Jewish rabbi writing in the 1940s. An octave too high. It's a piercing note. It's too much. But it breaks something open. Prophets are a little bit too over the top, too much for the system. And yet, it moves what's called the Overton window, this idea of these are the things that it is appropriate to talk about. Someone who is too much moves our window to increase what we actually have capacity to engage with. So Paul could have written this letter that says, hey guys, it might just be a little bit better, you might be nicer if, but he didn't. He blew it wide open. And he said, this is not appropriate. This is not okay. It is making you unwell. It is making the body of Christ unwell. Don't do this. Think about the impacts of your actions. Do better. And suddenly, when we were in this really narrow band of what was appropriate to talk about, what the community could actually sustain talking about if there was conflict, he blew it wide open and he said, no, we're going to have it out. We are going to put everything on the table. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think, and we're going to tell the truth, and all the pieces are going to be on the table, and then we get to actually look at them and build something better, something more kind. Something that doesn't value niceness, but values kindness. And there is where the Spirit will meet us. When we can actually see the system for what it is, speak the truth in kindness and in love, but with the anger that it is appropriate, and say, look, let's do better together. If we say that we have these shared values and we are not acting according to them, we actually have to tell the truth first, so that then the Spirit can reform us. We can remember who we are together and ensure that everyone has a place at the table. There are different ways of keeping something sacred. 2 years of classes and a lot of hoops to run through to be able to make sure I was worthy enough to touch it is a nice way of keeping something sacred, to make sure that you fit into the box that's appropriate. That's not how we do it here. The other way of ensuring that something is sacred is to ensure that everyone has access, to share it, to take joy in the act of sharing it, and to ask questions about the kindness of our system so that we are able to make sure that more and more and more people have a place where they are seen and known and valued and have access. And so we practice this in a kind way, where we look at the system and says, who's not here? How can we make it so that they can eat with us? How can we make it so that we are healthier when we are all together? How can we ask questions of ourselves about the ways we've been keeping someone from this sacred thing? And how do we let that transform us so we move closer and closer to the ideal that Christ set out? That's the invitation of this passage, the invitation of this meal. Come to the table, eat, be in community, share of yourselves, ask yourselves hard questions, tell the truth. God will meet you there. God will sustain you in that place. And it is there that we create the world that is to come. Amen.